Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to do another video about, it's not exactly about the Dracula movie per se, but because that Dracula movie was all the rage and it was such a big deal, and a lot of people liked it. I haven't seen it yet. Like I said, again, I don't know if I'm going to actually watch it, but we'll see. One of the things that I did kind of wanted to bring up was, it was kind of in reference to not just the last video I did about it, but also I wanted to bring in another topic that I talked about. I did a video where I was talking about, being predators and being predatory, and how if you're a predator, you end up in a cage or you end up dead. And I wanted to prove that by way of talking about, in this case, a famous person being Vlad the Impaler. And I wanted to kind of talk about how this isn't just American culture. We just live in a culture where, just in general, many of our world cultures are like this, where there's we tend to make the bad guys, or some of the worst people on planet Earth, get to be called heroes. And I feel that Vlad the Impaler is an example of that. And well, he's just one of many examples. And then not only that, but his story has been turned into romance movies. And it's quite wild. Not only has he been turned into a hero, but they've made it out to be, they've turned him into this romantic character, which is wild to me. And I guess given knowing who the real Vlad was. And I did the last video talking about that. And what I wanted to bring up was, again, that's my cat, y'all, sorry about that. When a person ends up predatory, they end up in a cage, they end up dead. Well, let me give an example. My cat is at the top of the refrigerator, y'all. I do apologize. Thank you. Okay, well, I do want to say that I want to talk about how a lot of people don't realize that when you live a life that's not good, like I was mentioning about, if you're a predator and you're ending up in a cave, blah, 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 or dead. Oh, I want to bring that up because people, you're not going to live a long life if you're out here being a terrible person. And I felt that Vlad was just a wonderful example of what that looked like. He wasn't a wonderful person, but we all know, you do your research, he was known to be a terrible person. He enjoyed impaling people. That was just, he did that for sport, And I've read some pretty disturbing excerpts and historical things about him doing that. But Vlad didn't live a long life. He did not live a long life. And I say that to say that not only was there a curse of early death on him, but I believe there was a curse of early death on his family, because it wasn't just him that didn't live a long life. Vlad the Impaler's father, as well as his eldest brother, also were murdered. So both his father and his oldest brother were murdered. Vlad himself, I believe he was also murdered. And I don't know about his brother Radu the Handsome, who, by the way, looks like my ex-husband. He may have also died too. I don't think he lived long either. But I say this to say that being a bad person has its consequences. And I say this to say that the fact that more than one person in his family, especially more than one man, we look at that in the church world as a generational curse, and as a generational curse of early death. The spirit of death clearly was all up in his family. Because you can't, because Vlad the Impaler, he didn't get to be awful by himself. Clearly, I believe he came from generations of that. Just if you do your reading on him, and not just him, but just his whole family. And another thing that I found interesting about him was his mother, her last name was Bathory. And I'm going to tell you why that stuck out to me. Because there was a lady, she was a Hungarian countess, and her name was Elizabeth Bathory. And she was called the Blood Countess because what she used to do, she was a demonic individual, by the way. And what she used to do was she used to lure poor women, and she used to murder them in horrible ways. What she used to do was she would tell poor families, she would promise to take their daughters and to basically improve their circumstances by teaching them the ways of, the way wealthy women and all that are educated and taught so that they could become women of high society. So that's what she used to lie to the parents and say that she was going to do, but in reality what she ended up doing was she would trick the families into giving her their daughters, and she used to torture and kill them in some of the worst ways. She was horrific. She was even known to supposedly bathe in the blood. Sorry, y'all. I could talk. She apparently used to bathe in the blood of virgins. That's what they said about her. But this woman was exceedingly wicked. I would suggest reading about Elizabeth Bathory. When I noticed that Vlad the Impaler's mother had the same last name as Bathory, you're not going to tell me that they weren't related. That would also add another layer to not just Vlad the Impaler being a bad man, but just his overall family, and just kind of showing that a lot of the people in his family are like this. He didn't get this way out of nowhere. He comes from generations of people that are this way. And the Bible says that the punishment for sin is death, but I've come so that you might have life. And sometimes there are things in our families that we may not even be aware of that are a source of one or more curses in your family. And I say this to say that this is definitely something that men need to address and look at, because we live in a society that teaches men to not only look up to, but even emulate men like this. To see violence and, being predatory as that's what being a man is, when in reality that's toxic masculinity, and it leads to, as I said before, Vlad the Impaler and his family. Come on now, the men dying early. They didn't live very long lives. And I say that, how does that apply in today's generation? Well, because we have a lonely male epidemic, you have men that are committing suicide as a result of them being lonely. Instead of going to therapy, getting set free, healed and delivered, they're out here killing themselves. And men already, from what I understand, the numbers say that they kill themselves in large numbers. Well, it's actually gotten worse. And so this is what I'm saying when I'm talking about the spirit of death, the spirit of suicide, and just the curse of early death. The curse of early death, when, instead, you're such a terrible person, and I'm not saying all men, I'm not talking about the good men, it ain't got nothing to do with the good ones. But if you're a man who is, you're not a good person, you do terrible things, you're not going to live a long life. You're sure not going to live a long, healthy life, because a lot of these men complaining about being lonely, a lot of them are miserable, wicked people, and nobody wants to be around them. And so you're alone because nobody wants to deal with you because you're that terrible. And it's leading to men committing suicide, which I don't think is funny. I'm not laughing about that. I don't condone it, and I don't think it's funny. We do have a problem, ladies and gentlemen. But this is something that men need to fix. They need to be responsible for fixing it. And, they need deliverance in Jesus. And they need to definitely be looking into their, your family history, your ancestry, so that way there can be an understanding of what the generational curses are, so that way those curses can be broken. Another example that I can give, a more recent example, an earlier example, would be the Kennedys. I don't know if y'all knew this, but a lot of the men in the Kennedy family, they would die young. A lot of them died really awful deaths, and they would die young. And back in the day, they were calling it a curse, which I agree with. Somebody in that family made agreements with people they shouldn't have been, with entities they shouldn't have been making agreements with. And as a result, men are taken out at a very young age, because that's a curse. It's a curse of early death. And I believe that we're seeing that with modern men today, and modern men need to address it. So that way these evil cycles don't continue. So, and then another thing I want to bring up about Vlad the Impaler that I think solidified the curse of early death was, as we all know, his father was a part of a group called the Order of the Dragon. That's why his last name is Dracul, or Draculia. That's where it comes from, because that's what his father was a part of. And you have to understand that a lot of elites are on some level a part of groups like this. These are organizations for ruling class families, the upper echelons. And there's a lot of demonic things that go on in these clubs and in these societies. And the Draculia branch was just one of many branches of these Illuminati or these strange organizations that we have around the world. We have them here in the U.S. All this talk about reptilians that they're saying right now, really, it's just going to lead back to these organizations, that have to do with the dragon, which we know of as the devil. And you're not going to tell me that based on these names alone, you're not going to tell me that there's no devil worship, or that there's no worshiping of Satan, that there's no Satanism involved, because we're crying out loud. Vlad called himself the son of the devil. So if that's not an obvious sign, then I don't really know what is. But I just thought that this was something interesting to bring up. I just thought I would talk about it, and I just thought that maybe this was something that men especially should, I don't know, maybe consider, look into. Bear it in mind, kick it around, because the curse of early death is very real. Ancestors can promise, or ancestors can enter into deals that happened way before any of you could be born. This happened centuries ago, long time ago. But a price had to be paid, and you end up not knowing what that price is until centuries later, until you do the digging and realize, oh my goodness. If there are certain evil patterns in your family that you see over and over again, you might want to look into that. You're more than likely dealing with a generational curse. And I just used Vlad the Impaler and also the Kennedys as an example. And we're seeing that curse play out with men as well, with just wicked behavior, which is leading you to jail, prison, or death, like I said in the last video. So I just say it's something to consider, something to think about. The organization that Vlad the Impaler was a part of, this is not the only dragon sector of this type of organization. You have many different organizations worldwide that have dragon as the moniker, as the name, or as the group that, that's what they call it. And so him being a part of that type of organization is not surprising to me, given what I know about the elites and then the ruling classes. Because a lot of these ruling classes, ancestors came into agreement with the devil and demons in exchange for power. So this is how they are able to rule in this world. And, as the devil said, when he was trying to tempt Jesus, he said, I will give you all these kingdoms of the world if you bow down and worship me. And why would the devil have the power to do something like that? Well, the Bible refers to him as the God of this world. So what the devil attempted to do to Jesus, but he failed. The devil has been doing this for centuries with other ruling classes. And he has put rulers on thrones and positions of authority and leadership because people have sold their souls, if you will, to the devil in exchange for power, rulership, and prestige. But people either don't know, they don't care, or they don't realize what the consequences will be. And one of the consequences, as I said before, the curse of early death. And you're seeing that curse especially fall on men. Men need to be aware of this. That's all I'm saying. Y'all have a wonderful rest of Sunday, and a wonderful rest of the week.